Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the annual WILIG Career Panel. My name is Meg de Guzman. I'm one of the WILIG co-chairs, and along with Yvonne Dutton, my fellow co-chair, I want to welcome you to our discussion this afternoon. And I just want to quickly say thank you to Lauren Hughes for organizing this fantastic panel and to our speakers for being willing to participate. And before I turn it over to Lauren for introductions, I just wanted to mention that WILIG is going to be having some elections this year for leadership positions, including my position. I'm at the end of my term as co-chair, as well as steering committee and other positions. So please stay tuned for that announcement, which should come out in, I think, later toward the end of this year, beginning of next year. And we also have an exciting panel coming up on women as perpetrators of atrocities. So stay tuned also for an announcement of that. That'll be in early December. So thanks again, Lauren and speakers, and I look forward to hearing all of your wisdom.
Thank you, Meg, and welcome all to our annual WILIG Career Panel. I'm very excited to be moderating today's panel after watching the past several years and participating in WILIG's mentoring program. So as Meg mentioned, my name is Lauren Hughes. I'm part of WILIG's steering committee, and I'm a clinical teaching fellow at Georgetown Law School in the Asylum Law Clinic. So I'm excited to speak to you all today and to have our fabulous panelists with us. Before I introduce our panel, I will say a big thank you to our WILIG co-chairs. As Meg mentioned, that's Meg and Yvonne Dutton. And a big thank you as well to all the WILIG mentors and mentees who were able to join us today. So we're glad that this can kick off the mentoring season. We're also thrilled that this event is co-sponsored by the Minorities in International Law Interest Group and the New Professionals Interest Group. So thank you to those groups for your support as well. And just a note on our procedure for today. So I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers, and then we'll start our conversation. There will be an opportunity for Q&A, about 10 minutes, hopefully at the end. So if you do have any burning questions for our speakers, please feel free to put those in the Q&A function that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And I will be able to share those questions with our speakers. And we're hoping to wrap up closer to 1 p.m. since I know we're all very busy and are fitting this into our day. So that's how we will do things. So again, a big welcome to our speakers. Again, I'm going to keep these introductions brief since you all have long bios and many credentials. So I've tried to condense them to the extent I can. So in no particular order, our speakers today are Betsy Apple, Sophia Durand, Jaya Ramji Nogales, and Emily Kimball. So I'm going to start with introducing Betsy. So Betsy is the executive director of a new NGO, Global Climate Legal Defense, known as CLIDEF, and a longtime adjunct professor of international human rights at Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. Prior to helping found CLIDEF in late 2022, Betsy worked for a decade at the Open Society Justice Initiative, where she was on the leadership team and undertook strategic litigation and legal advocacy. Betsy has used law and advocacy to challenge state and corporate violations relating to women's rights, mass atrocities, environmental and climate rights, and health and human rights all around the globe at several NGOs over her career, including Earth Rights International, Women's and Environment and Development Organization. So that is our first distinguished speaker. I will next turn to Ms. Sophia Durand. She is currently counsel at Enviva, one of the world's largest producers of sustainable woody biomass. In her role, she provides legal support and policy advice across all departments of the company on a wide range of domestic and cross-border regulatory, transactional, and dispute-related matters. And prior to her current position at Enviva, Sophia was an associate in the project finance group at the global law firm Norton Rose Fulbright. And there, her practice focused on representing private and public entities, including development finance institutions in domestic and international project finance, corporate finance, and renewable energy projects, with a primary focus on projects in emerging markets. Third, we have Professor Jaya Ramji Nogales. Jaya is an Associate Dean for Research in the I. Herman Stern Professor of Law at Temple University's Beasley School of Law. She specializes in asylum and refugee law, global migration law, and empirical assessment of asylum adjudication. Her work focuses on contemporary challenges to asylum and refugee law in the United States, and her work on global migration, a new field of study that she is developing along with colleagues in law and other disciplines, focuses on forced migration as well as the intersection of immigration and international human rights law. Prior to joining academia, Jaya practiced law as a staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union in New York, and she was an associate at the international law firm Debevoise and Plimpton. And last but very much certainly not least, we are joined today by Emily Kimball. Emily has served as a legal counselor at the U.S. Embassy in The Hague since fall 2021, representing U.S. interests in relation to the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the Iran-U.S. Claims Tribunal, and other international criminal tribunals and private international law institutions in The Hague. Her previous work with the U.S. Department of State includes serving as the Assistant Legal Advisor for Afghanistan, Pakistan, and South and Central Asian Affairs, representing the United States before the ICJ in the certain Iranian assets case, handling issues of foreign sovereign immunity and litigation against foreign states in U.S. courts, and advising on sanctions relating to North Korea, counterterrorism, and Syria. And prior to joining the State Department, Emily was a litigation associate at the law firm Simpson Thacher in New York. Wow, you guys have quite a bunch of impressive credentials there. So I'm very excited to get this conversation going. So with that, we'll start with our first question. I would just love to hear about what drew you each to the field of international law and how did you arrive where you are today? And so we'll just kind of go around in the order we started with. So Betsy, we'll open with you if that works.
Thanks so much. And thank you so much for the invitation. And it's great to be here in such esteemed company. And nice to meet you students, even though I can't see you, or you folks who are attending the panel. So the question is, what drew me to the field of international law? And how did I arrive at the position that I am at today? Well, it's not a straight line, so it's hard to say how I've arrived. It's been very much a zigzaggy line, but I would say that I went to law school knowing that I wanted to do social justice work, and I didn't know exactly what that would look like, but I started off in a law firm because nobody else would hire me to do social justice work. And that was not my destiny, I knew very quickly. And I started doing work as a legal aid lawyer. I actually created a position for myself, or advocated for the creation of a new position, doing work really focused a lot on family violence and working with survivors of family violence, primarily women. And at some point, I've always been interested in the broader world and made the connection between the work that was then characterized as domestic violence and gender-based human rights violations. And so the work that I did as a U.S. Legal aid lawyer was the springboard for me to really start doing work looking at gender-based violence globally. And maybe we can talk more over the course of this panel about what that decision, whether that was a good decision, whether it was the right decision, even though I'm incredibly happy and feel like I've been very lucky in my career. But that's just kind of how I made the leap from US work to international work. So maybe I'll stop there.
Thanks, Betsy. So I think that means that we will turn to Sophia next.
Oh, hi, everyone. Lauren, thank you for organizing this, and thank you for having me. It's nice to meet everyone. I think that my primary interest really is in sustainable development and more specifically access to clean energy. I grew up sort of all over the place, but primarily in the Middle East, and have ties in Africa and in Europe, and moved to the US 10 years ago. And what this really highlighted is just how fragmented international environmental law is, how there's not really a cohesive framework. And that was something that was really interesting. I want to learn more about that. And so I thought, go to law school, try and really focus my studies on international comparative law, just to understand how, what the interplay is between these different jurisdictions and sort of what gaps exist. After that, similarly to Betsy, I went to a law firm because there are lots of resources, because you can work with experts, and it wasn't my destiny either. I don't think that I would have spent my whole career there, But it was a really great opportunity to work with experts. It was a really great opportunity to work with and represent big organizations and understand how they work, to understand what their drivers are, specifically when investing in energy projects around the world. After spending some time there and sort of understanding how these organizations broadly work, I was really interested in understanding how specific businesses work, trying to get a bit more of the business perspective, understand what the market looks like when you're working in-house at a company. It's great to represent a company and work with development finance institutions and private and public entities, but you don't really get much insight into the decision making. And I was just really interested in understanding what drives these types of decisions. And yeah, that's how I ended up in-house. I now work for a large renewable energy company. I do a lot of work with the sustainability team. A lot of it is regulatory, a lot of it is transactional. I love a contract. It's the weirdest thing ever to say, but it's something that I really enjoy, working with contracts. And yeah, it's been a really good experience because I'm able to really leverage all of that knowledge that I gained through the International Comparative Law LLM at Duke. And I get to use those frameworks in my day-to-day work.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that corporate and private perspective, which I think can be harder to imagine when you're in law school. So I think that's really helpful. All right, so we'll turn to Jay next.
So huge thank you to Lauren for organizing and to all of you for being here. It's really a pleasure to be able to be part of this panel. And so I guess I went to law school interested in international human rights law, I guess in some ways for reasons similar to Sophia. My parents are immigrants. I grew up in Europe. And I'm really most comfortable in multicultural environments. And so that's why I went to law school. And when I got there, I found that immigration law was a really good fit. And first I was really focused on refugee law because of the international dimensions, but I found myself kind of less and less satisfied by the fact that that was really the only framework that international law had to offer, which is why I started working on this global migration law, trying to develop a more robust field. And so, I think one thing to say to people is if you don't see the space you fit in, then work to create it, right? And over a 20-year career, you can start to create that space and you'll find like-minded people who are interested in it. And then I went to work at Debevoise and Plimpton, which I actually really loved, and obviously like a super close relationship with the society, right? Two recent past presidents, Donald Donovan, who I worked with closely when I was there, Catherine Amerfar, who I didn't overlap with, but who's wonderful, right? So there's a lot of connections, and actually a lot of us went into academia from the firm, though it wasn't the destiny for many of us, but it was a nice place to be while I was there. I got to do a lot. I oversaw the pro bono asylum program. I got to do a lot of great asylum work. So I did enjoy my time there. And then working at the ACLU, which I also loved, just a great environment, still close friends with the people I worked with there, but that was really domestically focused. And I wanted to get back into refugee work. So I did the same fellowship at Georgetown, which was a great opportunity for me because I really loved working with clients and I wasn't sure I wanted to make the move to teaching. And so the 2-year fellowship at Georgetown really gives you a chance to keep your hand in the mix with practice and also work with students and figure out if academia is a trajectory you want to take. And I found that I loved working with students just as much as I loved working with clients. And I also love the freedom of academic writing. So that's really what's landed me where I am today.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're seeing some emerging themes. So look forward to seeing now listening to what Emily is going to say about her trajectory.
A huge thanks also from me, Lauren, for organizing and for others for joining. Quick required disclaimer from me that I'm speaking in my personal capacity and views expressed are entirely my own and not those of the US government. So just getting that out of the way. In terms of what drew me to international law, I think, like many law students, I was just drawn to the ideals that are inherent in international law and really the promise that it holds for peace and justice issues. I, was very much interested in a career that would blend law, but also policy and international relations. I too spent some time at a law firm at Simpson Thacher. I did international arbitration work there and also found that experience to be very valuable training out of law school, but was always fascinated by the work of the State Department's Office of the Legal Advisor and the really unique role that it holds in terms of international law, both in the US government and internationally. I never thought I would spend as long in any job as I have, but I really dedicated most of my career now to time in what we call L, or the Office of the Legal Advisor. And I think the reasons for that are kind of threefold. One is just I found the work to be incredibly rewarding because of the role that Elle has in the US government on international law issues that I care very deeply about. And I see the kind of opportunity to have a practical impact on the shaping of US positions in that space. Second would be just the structure of the bureau within the State Department allows for rotations during your career. And so for those who aren't familiar with the way it's structured, you can kind of continue to grow and develop as a lawyer, working on, very a wide range of areas of international law, from multilateral treaty negotiations to kind of domestic implementation of international law to regional issues. And so that I found I'm constantly learning, and I really enjoy that element of my job. And then the third would just be the people. I think it's been kind of a wonderful workplace environment in terms of the people who come to work in L and that community, as well as the sort of broader diplomatic community that we're part of. There's kind of the ASIL connection, but then also the connections that you make with your counterparts in foreign governments, civil society, and sort of more broadly, that's a community that I really enjoy continuing to network in and build contacts in. So I think those would be kind of general points I would make at the outset.
Emily, and that is perfect, a perfect segue into my next question. So perhaps we'll go in the reverse order this time and start with you, Emily. I want to ask you all about your mentors and who helped you get to where you are today, in addition to your brilliant minds and your hard work that went into it. Who was giving you advice along the way, and were other women guiding you or providing you examples of kind of where you could go and what your careers would look like? So that's my next question. So we'll just go right back to Emily, if you don't mind.
Sure. No problem. I think for me, it's very helpful to think about mentoring broadly. I think my mentors have really been both, folks in supervisory or more senior positions, but also colleagues and peers who have been a support and sounding board for me throughout my career. I mean, there's a lot of moments where you have self-doubt about kind of next steps, and having folks who you can turn to and trust is really important. But also having people who will push you to do things that are scary or feel like a real reach. Getting on a plane with a policy team to like hop into a negotiation that were just getting briefed on, and being the sole lawyer in a situation like that, things like that. I remember talking to, a female lawyer who I really respect, who had spent a lot of time in negotiations, and this was my first one, and just she took the time to sit down with me and sort of brainstorm approaches. And I think sort of having people like that is really important, and cultivating those relationships is important. At the same time, I've tried to do the same for others, both my colleagues, both junior lawyers and others, to be a resource. And one thing, just a recent example here at the embassy, my most recent supervisor created a breakfast book club on leadership and management for section heads, female section heads. And so there was a group of us that would get together every other week to just talk through leadership and management issues and challenges that we were facing in, very different sections of the embassy. And I found that format, rather than kind of a formal training course, to be very valuable and useful.
It's a great insight that it doesn't have to necessarily be from formal mentors, although we love our formal WILIG mentoring program. We can pull from a lot of places for our mentors. So with that, we'll go back to Jaya and hear what role mentoring played in your career trajectory.
Great, thanks so much. And I mean, I guess I'll say I couldn't have gotten anywhere without my mentors. They played such an important role in so many ways in helping me make good decisions, in acting as in the academic realm, acting as a reference to get that academic job is really, really important. So, I'm just so grateful to all of my mentors. A special shout out to Jean Co Peters, who is my mentor in law school, who has since retired, who I think many people know well, and those of her mentees always ask in any situation, what would Jean do? And you can never live up to what Jean would do, but it's at least you're trying to do the right thing if you invoke Jean. And then folks in the society, again, Diane Amon, Adrienne Wing, there are many wonderful women who really look out for other women and help us to get where we need to go. I also want to emphasize that I've had some really great male mentors. So Phil Schrag and Andy Schoenholtz at Georgetown. I would not be where I am today without their never-ending and incredibly generous support. Henry Richardson from Temple, who's also retired. So you will find mentors in many places, and when whoever is willing to help you, take them up on that, because everyone can play a helpful role in getting you where you need to go. And also just to emphasize that women and men have played really important roles in recent years in diversifying the society. So an extra special shout out to James Gatti, Adrienne Wing, again, Catherine Powell. A lot of people have played important roles. So that's really important. And just to piggyback on Emily's thought about having kind of peer mentors, I think that's incredibly important. At my stage of my career, it's about having a committee of no who helps you decide when you need to turn things down so that your life will be sane. I think that's really important. But, when I was a junior faculty member, we had a group of female faculty who would get together for lunch. And, that's still kind of going strong many years later. And similarly, when I worked at the ACLU, we had a group of attorneys of color who got together for lunch regularly. I'm going to have lunch with them in 2 weeks. 20 years later, we're still having lunch together, and we're still all really good friends. So those are the friendships that endure and help guide you throughout all of your career. So I think don't underestimate them, as well, as Emily said.
Thank you. And so with that, we'll go back to Sophie.
Yeah, I actually want to echo what my two co-panelists just said, the importance of finding mentors everywhere. They're not necessarily superior to you. I found that most of the support I've actually received since starting my legal career has been from peers, from people who are around the same level as me. And I think it's because we're all going through something together. We're able to learn together as we go. So I think back to one of my closest friendships. It's a person, we started big law together. We're the same class year. We went in-house around the same time, and we've really been able to talk through a lot of things that I don't think we would talk to other people about. Negotiation, salary negotiations, or things like that, really, that are not particular to international laws, but, finding women with whom you feel comfortable having these sometimes uncomfortable conversations if something happens in the workplace. You might not want to necessarily ask questions of someone who's superior, just being able to find a group of people who are going through the same thing and who are able to guide you. And, also to Jaya's point, there are a lot of men who've been really fantastic mentors. I think back to my time in my law firm, my former law firm, a male partner, first day he asked, does anybody here speak French? I said, yes. He's like, great. We're leaving soon to go to XYZ country for this negotiation. And I was really nervous, obviously, because I was a baby lawyer and knew nothing. But it was, having someone who believed in you and someone who would talk you through your concerns and address your concerns was just really, really helpful. It could be men, it could be women, people older than you, people who are your level, people who are younger than you. So really seeking out just, people that you feel comfortable with. And that's really helped me, I think, to Emily's point, fostering those very valuable relationships.
Thank you. All really great advice. So Betsy, I know you'll have some more nuggets to add to that.
Thanks. Well, I would say that at the start of my legal career, I did not have mentors particularly. I had peers who were I had my crew. And it was my crew who really kind of kept me afloat and helped me through the tough choices that I had to make. And in fact, I would say that in my first law job in the law firm, my supervisor was a woman, and she was most decidedly not a mentor. And I will say that the experience that I gained from, and that's happened a couple of times, because you don't always work for people, women or otherwise, who are going to be supportive of you. And I decided to take lessons from those experiences. So in a funny way, the people who were not necessarily propping me up or supporting me were some great teachers, because I learned how to work with some very difficult women and men. And so I think that's just something to note, because you won't always be embraced fully by everybody you work with, supervisor or not. So, but I do think, I guess I will say that because I didn't have strong female mentors early in my legal career, I have very deliberately set out to be a mentor to a lot of the young women I've worked with in the NGO world, and also to a lot of my students, because I teach at SIPA. And I really think that it's important to look around for people who, not only your peers, but people who have a little more experience and a little more wisdom, because you really want a diverse group of folks to be your crew. And I do wish that I had done that more early in my career.
Well, I think that gives me a couple of ways that we could go on this panel from the other questions that I have for you all. But I think I'll go with our next question, which is, what advice would you give yourself at the start of your career? Which I think is going to be a pretty interesting range of answers, because it sounds like you guys each started in similar places, working in law firms out of law school, and yet you all ended up in very different places in different areas of the law and career paths, but all within international law. So with that, if you don't mind, Betsy, since you sparked that question, I will go back to you and see, what advice would you have given yourself?
Sure. Well, in addition to the advice, I think I've already I would say a couple of things. I think that all too often we're constrained by what we can see around us rather than what we can imagine. And so I would say that it's a big world with lots of different ways to be to do international law. And I think that I realized fairly early on that I wasn't quite seeing the job that I wanted, so I was going to have to figure out a way to create it. And it's hard work and it's risky, but I do think it's possible. So I guess that's one piece of advice. And I realized that early enough on in my career to take advantage of that. But I think if I had gone to law school and recognized that maybe I wasn't going to be able to get the job I wanted, but I might be able to work toward it by creating it, it might have changed things a little bit. So that's one thing, is don't be confined by what you can see. And I think the other thing that I think about, the words that I think were most important to me now when I reflect back on my early career. And I think those three words that resonate a lot with me are humility, ambition, and risk. And I took a lot of risks relatively early in my career, and they paid off. I took leaps that may not have seemed wise at the time. I quit my law firm job when I didn't have another job because I was so unhappy there. And that paid off because I was able to then create a position. So, but I think the balance between humility about who you are and what you know and what you can do, and ambition is really important. Don't lose sight of being ambitious, but also be humble about who you are and what you bring. When you're a new lawyer, there's a lot you don't know. And I think also just being willing, if you're able, to take some risks without necessarily knowing where they're going to lead you. I've had a really interesting and rich career, and I'm here now in a place that I would not have imagined 20 years ago. And part of that is because I was willing to take leaps. So I think it's really important to keep yourself open. So maybe I'll stop there.
That's great advice, and hard to find the courage to do that, but essential for developing that career that you are dreaming of. So that we'll go back to Sophia.
Sure. I might have a more developed answer in a couple of years, but I think a couple of things that are, when I look back, I think, I wish I had been a little bit more intentional very early on. I think that, entering specifically, in my case, a big law firm, having a need to prove myself. And so willing to take on a lot, willing to really, not willing to establish any boundaries, not really being intentional in what you choose to work on the people that you want to work with. And I think that that really does contribute to burnout, because when you become a yes person, you're not necessarily liking what you're doing anymore, but you feel like you need to do it. And so I wish that I could have, been a bit more intentional at the beginning. I really like Betsy's answer about being open and taking risks. I think, something else I wish I had felt like I had the courage to do. When I started feeling really unhappy at a law firm, I think I stayed there longer than I should have, because I felt like it would be too risky to take a leap without having anything, not really knowing what the path would look like. But, it's maybe a risk that I should have taken. So just being open and being intentional with the choices that you make.
Excellent advice. I'm writing all of this advice down, by the way, so I can also apply it to my my career. With that, we'll turn back to Jaya.
Thanks so much. Yeah. And actually, to Sophia's point, maybe we need a committee of no, like from the very start, right? Not just when you've been in your career for 20 years. It's helpful to just think about when you say yes to things and when to say no. I guess if I could give myself advice, it would be just to believe in yourself, I think, and to remember, like, you made it here despite enormous odds, which speaks volumes to your talents and your ability to succeed. And if you look around and think that everyone is more capable than you, I think take a step back and understand what part of that is privilege. I think that's really important to think about. And I see this a lot raising my kids, how much cultural and academic capital they have, because they have two parents with advanced degrees, knowledge of the US higher education system. My parents had none of that. Like, there was plenty of socioeconomic privilege in my background. I don't want to say there wasn't, but they had no idea how to navigate the system. And so I found my way largely on my own, plenty of love and support, but like no idea what I was doing, right? And so when I think about where I got despite that, I think now that I am where I am, I think, okay, like I can be happy with where I am, and I can look and say, like, I should have been more confident, and I shouldn't have looked around and thought, I don't belong here, because the imposter syndrome is real. It does get better, but it's real and it's there. But remember, you got here for a reason. Yeah. So believe in yourself would be what I would say.
Well, thank you. Emily, we'll turn to you.
Sure, thanks. No, and I completely agree with the points about taking risks and leaps, absolutely, and also believing in yourself. There's so many skills that international lawyers can sort of grow into, but you have to be willing to kind of take those risks, because it is such a multifaceted career, and the application of international law has so many dimensions that I think, it's not just writing a brief or doing a research memo. You have to get out there and meet foreign counterparts, and be willing to engage externally, but also internally, and think about sort of the U.S. Side of things as well. So yeah, I think sort of being willing to take those risks is important. For me, one thing that I wish that I had focused more on earlier on is something that has become really clear now in my current position at the U.S. Embassy here in The Hague, and that's just the extraordinary value of cultivating relationships with foreign counterparts for any international lawyer. I mean, it's a really kind of unique position that I have here, in the sense that all of the embassies that most of them have an equivalent position where they'll have a legal advisor or counselor on staff. And so you have in The Hague kind of a mini UN legal community, and you get to live and work and get to know colleagues from all different legal systems. And that has given me such a greater appreciation for how I approach international law issues. And I think there's some opportunities to do that in Washington as well. I don't think that I seized as many of those opportunities, but I think that that's something that if you have opportunities to engage with lawyers from other countries, whether in through law school programs or at firms or elsewhere, I just if you can look to seize those opportunities, I think they usually are very valuable.
Well, excellent advice. And again, writing that to-do list for myself currently of things I can implement after this panel. So another question that a few of you have touched on that I would like to come back to is specific challenges that you each have faced, either in pursuing a career in international law or as a woman in international law, and if you felt that race or nationality might have played a role in those challenges. So I guess I will switch up the order this time, and we'll start with Jaya and then go around from there.
Great. Thanks so much. And, we could have an entire panel on this, I think. I think starting with the serious lack of gender diversity in the field of international law, it's gotten better, but there's still a real lack of diversity. And so what does that mean? That means that your perspectives, your ideas aren't always taken that seriously, right? There are plenty of spaces with a dearth of women. And so I along with Diane Amen and Beth Skok, founded the IntLaw Girls blog, which is, I think, still running to kind of start to change that a little bit. And I think there has been progress, but there's still a lot of work to be done. We're seeing fewer manels, but there are still manels. And then, spaces in which you're the only woman. Right. I see that a lot. And some of those spaces are more welcoming than others, or you're one of only a couple of women in a room of 15 people. And some of those spaces are more welcoming. Some of them are less welcoming. And that's really just for cis women. Like if we think about non-binary and trans folks, right, the underrepresentation is shocking. And I think we still see the pink ghettos where there are certain fields where women work and they're taken a little less seriously. And again, we're working to change this. I'm co-editing the Oxford Handbook on Women in International Law, and we're really right. We have women writing about law of the sea and space law and areas that are traditionally male dominated, but there is a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done. And then there's also a serious lack of diversity in terms of race and in particular nationality, which, given that we call ourselves an international law community, is they're both deeply concerning. And again, similar issues. I'll be in situations where there's one woman and one person of color in the room, and it's me, and I'm American, right? So that's not great. And so representation from the global South is really a problem. There are great folks like Usha Natarajan and John Reynolds, right, building on the foundation of the Twale greats, to kind of take this very seriously and think very strategically about how we can move this forward. And then, as I've said before, folks like James Gatti and others trying to diversify. But I guess I'll just say there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot of work to be done.
It's very true. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I think it's a really valuable message for young lawyers to hear and hear about the work that still needs to be done. So Betsy, I'll go back to you if that's okay, because I know you identified some challenges you faced.
Yeah, I think everything that Jaya says is true. And I think the pink ghettos piece really resonates strongly. I'm in the NGO world, and there are so many women in the NGO world, and one has to ask why that is. I think we probably know why it is. But I think that, from a gendered perspective, there are lots of challenges. I think until quite recently, I would say a lot of international human rights and international environmental NGOs were, and still in many cases are, led by men. And so I think that's, there are leadership deficits when it comes to gender balance that I think some of us have been struggling against for a long time. I think in terms of race and nationality, I think I guess in all candor, I want to say that as a white American trained lawyer who is a US citizen, I have been wrestling for a long time with the question of whether or not it's appropriate for me to be engaging in international work, by which I mean, really, I've lived internationally, I've done work that's really focused on human rights in other countries, and I constantly wrestle with whether or not I should be doing what I'm doing. And I think it's really important to ask oneself that question, why me? What do I bring to this? And I think, what do I think I have to offer? And I think it's really important to interrogate the role that one's identity plays in the international space. So maybe, maybe we can talk, if we talk about some of the other challenges, being a mother, being a parent in the international space, there's a whole bunch of other challenges that I could talk about there. Maybe that's another question that you're going to ask, but maybe I'll stop right there. Thanks.
Well, very helpful to identify the whole spectrum of issues that can come up, and really, yes, being aware of our this being ASIL, being aware of our role as American lawyers in the international law sphere. So with that, Emily, I'll jump to you.
Great points already. I think to Jaya's point, the real continuing gender disparity in leadership and high-ranking positions at the kind of core public and private international law institutions has been kind of like a constant reminder here in The Hague, just kind of how far we do have to go. I think it's also true of the bar of lawyers who appear before both the ICJ and the criminal tribunals, that there is a disparity, that defense counsel is disproportionately female, so that there are these kind of disparities. The lack of gender disparity at the ICJ bench is a key component of the U.S. campaign to elect Professor Sarah Cleveland to the ICJ in the elections next week. So we have been really actively promoting the importance of electing such a highly qualified female candidate, and the importance of all states seriously considering the kind of shocking gender disparity at the ICJ. If she's elected, she would be only the 6th permanent female judge on the ICJ. So that sort of speaks volumes, I think. I will say, with respect to L in particular, kind of zooming back to my own experience, that generally it's been a very positive experience in terms of gender balance in the workforce and management level positions, although it is the case that we've only had one confirmed female legal advisor, so at the very top, although we do hopefully have a second one coming through soon with Margaret Taylor's nomination pending. But kind of below the legal advisor position, it is quite balanced just in terms of the numbers, and that has been helpful. We do have a long way to go in terms of on the racial side, in terms of racial diversity and other forms of diversity, but I would say sort of gender is a place where we're in a good spot. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Emily. Helpful to know. It's not all bad news on this question. Appreciate that. And we'll turn it over to Sophia.
Thanks, Lauren. I think a lot of the challenges that, at least I've faced have been the same challenges that women face in the legal profession broadly. Obviously there are certain challenges that are unique to the international legal sphere, but it really is, a lack of women in positions of leadership. Very rarely, I don't think I've ever worked with a Black woman lawyer in any capacity, which is absurd, which is absolutely absurd. I've worked with women, and I've worked with Black men, but it's, oftentimes, in fact, all of the time, I'm the only Black woman walking into a meeting with other lawyers, or walking to a meeting with clients, or with internal stakeholders. And so there's really always, it feels like a need to have to prove yourself, to have to justify why you're there, to, make sure that people feel like they can trust you. And it can be very exhausting to feel like you have to do that every time you walk into a room. And I think that it's it's more true for, in international law or in the international legal profession. It tends to be, the people in charge tend to be white men. When I think about, for example, the development finance institutions that I've worked with or that I've represented, do a lot of work in emerging markets. These are people who don't necessarily, who might have an understanding sort of across the ocean, but who might not have actually a real understanding of what's happening in the ground, or, have not engaged with stakeholders in the same way that maybe they should, coming from a different perspective. And so it can sometimes be a little bit exhausting to try and have to bring in a different perspective, and then convince people that your perspective is worth listening to. So I think that's a big challenge. Again, I think it's not unique to international legal sphere. I think this is true of just being a woman, being a lawyer. Maybe something else as well, and I think that we touched on this a tiny bit, but navigating different cultural norms when working in international law. So, female lawyers will face, I think, a lot of bias sort of anywhere in the world, but you might be judged for different things. And so understanding, cultural norms in the jurisdictions that you're working with, when you're working with lawyers in another country, how can you be most effective when working with them? What can you do to really engage in discussion? So, those are some considerations.
I think those are all great points to kind of be aware of when we're choosing where we're headed in international law and who we're able to rely on in combating some of those challenges. So I think that leads us into one more heavy question. Sorry, this has gotten too heavy, but it's I think important to talk about a burnout in the legal profession. And I know in certain practice areas, it's been, I think, talked about in siloed ways, but I would love to have a conversation about what attorney burnout has looked like, or how your workplaces have responded post-COVID, wherein everyone's mental burden was added to significantly. And is there anything specifically about international law that you felt has either mitigated or contributed to burnout or lack of burnout? And we did get one question about moments in your career where you do feel unhappy and you felt like you wanted to make a change. And I think specifically the question was about law firms, but I think that can happen, in all types of employment. So, how do you recognize that you are burnt out, and what do you do from there? Sorry, that's a broad question, but if you're okay, Sophia, I'll go back to you since you were just touching on that topic.
Yeah, sure. For me, burnout is when you are working and you do not enjoy the work that you're doing anymore, and you feel like you are doing it because you have to do it and not because you want to do it. And I think it's really important to identify when you get to that point, because life is short, and you should really try and pursue, if you work this hard to get to where you are, why stay in a position if you're unhappy? Specifically to the question about working in a law firm, it was really difficult to work in a law firm during COVID, which coincided, with the summer of George Floyd's killing. So we were adjusting to working remotely, sort of having to be available 24 hours a day, while also dealing with sort of the mental load of what's happening around you, about, dealing with or having to engage with employers about systemic issues that you are well aware of, but they are just, starting to talk about. And so it can be really heavy. It was really heavy. It's encouraging to see that, at least working in a big law firm, that they were able to adapt pretty quickly to working remotely. But what that meant was that there were really no more boundaries. People felt comfortable calling at any time of the day because you were always home. People felt okay, requesting you to do things at night because you're not going anywhere, and not necessarily understanding how other things that are happening. So I'm thinking about the summer of George Floyd's killing, how that could be impacting your morale, how that could be impacting your ability to do your work. And so it became very clear to me that it was not worth the mental health burden, or not worth feeling the way I did for a paycheck. Truthfully, that's what it was. It was, I wanted to work in a place, people who respected me, with people who understood, what was going on, and where I felt like I was actually contributing, being impactful, and liking the work that I did. Sorry, that was very long-winded and all of that.
No, that's great. It's great insight into what it really was like in that moment, and those are very great signs to be aware of when you're entering in a career, to know
Yeah.
what
And
burnout
one
looks like.
thing, just I think it's also important to address this, because perhaps people in the audience might be immigrants, or people who aren't American citizens or permanent residents. I only very recently became a permanent resident, conditional resident, but there are a lot of other things sort of happening in the background that your employers might not know about. And those are things that are emotionally taxing. Those are things that take up a lot of room in your head. And I think that it can contribute, you have to be willing to put your foot down and establish those boundaries, because they're things that people don't know about. And I think it can be really, it could run you to the ground if you try and take on too much. And so, yeah, just wanted to add that as well, because it is another thing that a lot of people have to deal with.
Absolutely, those invisible burdens that are added on top of the things that we're all dealing with. So I will turn to Jaya next, knowing that we're being a little more conscious of time with your time, Jaya. So we'll let you have that word before you jump out.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Sophia, for sharing that. I think that was really important for people to hear. And I have to apologize. I'm teaching class at 1, so I'm going to say my piece and then run off. But actually maybe a little bit to Sophia's point. So I think that's absolutely validly one definition of burnout, but you can also have burnout in a field you love. So immigration law is a field where there's a ton of burnout, because actually for kind of reasons you were saying, because there's been just such a full scale sustained attack on the asylum system, on immigration law, on immigrants of color. And so that itself can lead to burnout. Lindsay Harris and Hillary Mellinger have written a great article about stress, burnout, trauma in the immigration field, and how to, kind of ameliorate, prevent, work on you're creating a safe space to ensure that you thrive and to ensure that you have a sustainable career. And I would definitely recommend that to everyone. And I would also kind of echo that the lack of diversity is contributes to burnout substantially, both because there's a lot going on in your head, but also I feel that I have to be in every space all the time to diversify leadership, because I think decisions are made differently. Perspectives of women and people of color are taken more seriously, and also to support those coming up in the profession who are diverse on, race, sexual orientation, gender, nationality. So I feel like I'm always working to diversify, and it's very hard for me to say no to certain things, because I want to make sure that door is open for the person who comes after me. And so that's just a bigger demand on you all the time. And there's a sense of guilt for saying no, but also I like to see my children. So at some point I have to say no, and I have to think about them and not just opening doors all the time. And so that's hard. And I will also say that, I see in a leadership position the role that gender and race plays, because I'm on a leadership team where 4 out of 5 of us are women and 1 man of color. And we take mental health very seriously in a way that I haven't seen in previous leadership teams. And we're working on it very actively, right? It's really a core part of what we do. And so I think, there's also that's one reason it's important to have women and people of color in leadership, because, we're just not across the board. I don't want to be stereotypical, but right, the chances are that we will take it more seriously, and that's better for everyone. With that, I will say a huge thank you. Thanks to all of you for coming, and I hope the rest of the panel goes wonderfully well.
Thank you so much, Jaya. Hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye.
So with that, we'll jump over. I think we'll go back to Betsy and see, what I think you were alluding to. Parental responsibilities can perhaps be an additional challenge. Kind of what are your experiences and thoughts on burnout and in international law in particular, Ben?
Yeah, thank you. So for my first international job at a young NGO called Earth Rights International, I was working on I was living on the Thai-Burma border and spending a lot of time in refugee camps and in the jungle. And my colleagues and I were living together and working together, and it was a 24/7 proposition. We were building a new organization, and this was exhilarating, but it was also really exhausting. And I had a baby and started bringing my baby to the refugee camps once I returned to the US. And just, it seemed normal at the time, but I look back on that part of my life where I began to do international work, and it now seems a bit crazy. And many of my closest friends in the international legal world are women, and I think all of us, those of us who have children or had children, decide it's hard. It's just really challenging to figure out, when you're traveling all the time, how do you deal? And so I'm lucky enough to have an incredibly supportive partner who made it possible for me to do that. But it's not sorry, can I just finish or should I stop now? Okay.
Oh, please.
Okay.
I'm not sure what happened there, but
Yeah, no,
please
that's
continue.
okay. I mean, I guess the other thing I want to say is that with respect to this question about when you're burned out, I mean, I have had moments where I've been burned out doing the thing that I love the most, because it feels so very important. And that means that I've put no limits on it. And I think in my world, the NGO world, international NGO world, sometimes it almost feels like a competition who can work harder, because the problems are so big, and you feel guilty if you say, I need a rest. There was one point where I was traveling back and forth to South Africa, documenting mass sexual violence against women. And I ended up collapsing after a year of that. But I felt like I couldn't stop. So it's really figuring out what your limits are and trying to figure out how not to feel guilty about that. That's not easy. That's really not easy. So maybe I'll stop there.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it is exactly to that point. It isn't easy to identify those things. That's why we rely on other people and have great people in our lives to help us, because we cannot do it alone. So thank you for sharing that. And with that, Emily, I'll turn to you and get your thoughts on this subject.
Thanks, and already hugely valuable insights. Very useful points already developed on this question. I mean, I think to Sophia's point, I think you used the word heavy. There's a lot of heaviness often in international law, in both the subjects that you're working on, whether it's atrocities or human rights abuses or conflict settings, that can be draining and difficult to work on those issues. And so that's something to think about, because they can have an emotional impact. And then there's other elements of your life that can be difficult to work through as well. And then I think there's, one other kind of element that Betsy, you touched on, is travel. That's a big feature of work in the international law field, is travel. Work often spans multiple time zones. So like often you have calls that are very late or very early. We do a lot of diplomatic engagement here, so you often have many evening functions. So, in terms of work life balance, it can be difficult. And I think, one point I will say post-COVID is that the challenges that we were all grappling with, I do think there is a growing recognition in the workplace, that there is a connection between work-life balance and supporting mental health needs and efforts to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace, and that these are interconnected issues. And so you are seeing more recognition. Whether it's resulting in change is another question, but I think there is a recognition of the connection, and that is helpful. I think having a community of supportive colleagues and organizing your work in a way that allows for backups can be very helpful. That's one thing that, as you're getting burned out, if there's a way to take a break, but really take a break, like really take a vacation and not be on your phone the whole time. Backups are important. So that's one way. At embassies, this is my first overseas posting. Most lawyers are based in Washington, and there's only a handful of posts for lawyers. But I've had the chance to kind of interact in the foreign service community, where there's a health unit at every embassy, and they address both physical and mental health needs. And that's something that's a growing effort, is to have sort of both being met and on site, which is an interesting kind of dimension of having that, at the workplace. And then I think the point about setting priorities, and saying no is always key. It's always really hard for type A ambitious lawyers, but you do need to set priorities and also have buy-in from your supervisors, so that the priorities can be set, and that there's kind of a plan so that it works. So I guess one final point I would just add is that, I had a supervisor who sometimes would just say done is better than perfect. And I think also you have to recognize that you may not always be able to do a perfect job on what you're doing. And that's part of trying to mitigate burnout as well. So that's all from me.
Thank you all so much for sharing. I think not only great advice, but, really personal, heartfelt advice from your things you've learned from your own experience. So I think we've gotten some comments in the Q&A in the chat about thanking you all for really giving honest answers to some tough questions. So I think it will go a long way for helping law students and new lawyers understand, what lies ahead in both terms of the positives and the things that we can all be excited about as far as creating that career path that we want and dream about, just making it happen, but also knowing, the work that goes into getting there. So I appreciate all of you for giving us your lunch hour today, or your evening hour, Emily. So we very much appreciate it. And I want to thank you all for joining us for today's panel. For all of those who are able to attend, and a big thank you to ASIL staff who was able to organize this and put this together, and for our co-sponsors, WILIG and the New Professionals Interest Groups. So I'll let you know that the recording will be available online in the coming days. So if anyone wasn't able to join and you're aware of that, you want to share the link, please feel free. Or if you heard some good advice that you think some other people need to hear, please feel free to share it. We also will have, like Meg mentioned, some upcoming WILIG events and WILIG elections. So keep an eye out for those either through our listserv or on our LinkedIn page. And again, a huge thank you to all of our panelists today. It was such a great conversation. So thank you all for joining us. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a
Thanks
lot.
again, everybody. That was awesome.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.